Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Line update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Hi, everyone. Welcome to State of State. I'm Tom Hannafin. He's Justin King. Today, officially, the spring transfer portal window has opened, and you're probably wondering what Penn State football is going to be doing during this time period. We're recording this on Tuesday, so we're going to discover this along with all of you. We know about JB Nelson into the portal at this point in time, but we're going to keep an eye on this as the weeks go by and see what Penn State players potentially jump into the portal and if Penn State makes any acquisitions. However, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the landscape shifting event from earlier on this week. Now, a lot of Penn State football fans may not care about the starting quarterback for Tennessee, Nico Iamaleava, jumping into the transfer portal and trying to hold up the Volunteers for a whole bunch of money. But the ripple effect is enormous, and it is going to touch every program in major college football, and especially a top 5 program like Penn State football. So, Justin, you deal with a lot of things like this in the NIL space, recruiting, coaches, etc., with LAG Sports Group. So I think this conversation is huge in that there's a lot of stuff out there saying that Nico's representation was trying to hold up Tennessee for more money and trying to hold up Tennessee for more money, even going into the playoff, and that this has kind of been going on for a while. And there's a lot of layers to it of, was this a failure by his representation, namely his agent's representation? Was this a failure on the part of the family? His father's been very outspoken. Was this a failure on the part of the player? Was this a failure on the part of Tennessee football? Is this a greater failure on the part of college football? And I think the really interesting thing is the schools and programs that I would categorize as NIL teams versus developmental teams. And that word developmental can get a bad reputation. I don't think it is, because what you look at Penn State, that's not an NIL team. Texas Tech, Colorado, Ole Miss, those are NIL teams. Oregon, for a little while now, we got to find out if Dan Lanning has actually built something in recruiting. That's been an NIL team. What are the developmental programs? Ohio State clearly developed quite well with some standout transfers here and there. Of course, everybody seems to have them. Clemson has proved they want to be a developmental program. The list goes on and on. But what was your 30,000-foot view of this Nico situation? How does it affect Penn State football and college football?
Well, college football, the number one culprit, I would say, is the NCAA, right? When you don't have any competitive rules that deal with operations and roster movements and things of that nature, that's typically the division that oversees, player movement and the operational aspect from roster management standpoint. So for the NCAA not to have that, and we're bringing in all these new rules in a competitive game, you're expected to see these things happen. And then there's context of the picture being painted. Well, I mean, that the players have been taken advantage of for the past 100 years, right? So there's a lot of people that are uninformed and well-meaning about the business that feel like certain players have more leverage than they may have, and then they just reassess or they misjudge the value of the asset and then start trying to maneuver things for short-term gains and not just necessarily understanding the whole player life cycle or the whole business life cycle of an athlete or a sports asset. So I think this is a problem that's layered, right? But it starts with the leadership from the NCAA to not have any bounds. Then it comes down to representation, right? Understanding how the internal operations move. If you're dealing with an asset, it's up for that asset to still produce and move around in this building. I think that's something that's always missed when you have like agents or representatives that want to poke their chest out. We're going to stick it to the man. We're going to stick it to the team. We're going to stick it to the coaches. It's like, yo, these players got to walk through it. And I don't think they know how prepared the other side is, right? Me coming from the other side, when this situation happened, I was like, oh, this is bad in the spring, because like going into the spring transfer portal is completely different than the winter, right? Like we're talking about problem situations here. And so coaches, I mean, they're together a lot more when it comes to competitive balance and messing with rosters from that standpoint than they are just, let's say, like paying guys, right? I think the headlines have been about paying people and how much money some guys are getting, or coaches getting money versus the players. And I think that's that's just the wrong argument when it's like fundamentally bad business, right? When we're talking about the product that's going on the field. So again, this is multi-layered, but the people that are going to pay the hardest consequences is going to be Nico, his representatives, and things of that nature. Tennessee's going to recover. Like they'll find another quarterback, right? Like all these different type of things. And actually it shows a level of, grit and power from the university. Like I don't think these players realize that, there's grown men working on the other side that like they're building a culture for sustainability. Like we cycle through 2 to 3 years, and if we don't have that dynamic or that context of the dynamic that's actually happening, a lot of these representatives that are giving advice are speaking from an ego-driven, really just unprepared perspective, or I'm going to say unprepared, but just lack of knowledge or lack of exposure to like what's actually happening, because everyone reads the headlines and kind of thinks it's one way, and it can get spooky for a lot of players. And so I think it's the NCAA's fault for not having any bounds, representatives for not necessarily understanding the business mechanics and how to move a player the right way for him to be successful, not necessarily you getting in the headlines and doing whatever. And then the player, because ultimately they're responsible for their career. Once they turn 18, 19, it's incredibly important that you have responsibility, or you're responsible for that team and infrastructure that you put around them. So like everything that you've seen in the NFL, 27 to 28 guys, all the outcome things, guys going broke and divorced and all the things that we say, oh, well, they had all this time. All that stuff is just transitioning down, you know what I mean? 5 to 7 years. And we're just without any support, without any infrastructure from the establishment. So, and at the end of the day, the players are most vulnerable in this situation, and everybody else has a lot of different opportunities to benefit from it. But that's how the business is structured. So it's kind of hard to point the fingers if we're just not going to see like, hey, who set the rules up? Because everybody's going to try to exploit rules to do things, but to whose benefit it comes down to. So it's pretty nuanced. And that's my thing with the Nico thing, because it's kind of unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate, and that, it's a lot of things. You can look at Nico as an individual, and yes, he is a kid, but you're in this business. You've got $8 million up front to go to Tennessee. So you have to take some ownership of this process, because the agents aren't going to really care what the fallout is. They're going to get a percentage either from you or from somebody else. His dad's reputation is what it is, but he's not the person trotting out there playing games on Saturdays. Nico is the one who is now damaged, because who is going to want to pay the price tag that he asked for? Potentially no one. So he's going to have to potentially take a pay cut from what he was taking at Tennessee. The whole thing is just extremely short-sighted to me, because now this is setting up a track record for how you do business at this level and beyond. If he's fortunate enough to play in the National Football League, it's like, you're going to pull this stuff nonstop? Am I going to have to deal with your dad? Am I going to have to deal with your representation? Are they going to continue to pull this sort of stuff? And also now it's kind of like falling into place where which schools are already saying they're out, like USC, Oregon, UNC already being like, we're good. Here's the other thing. He didn't have that great of a season last year. So if he had a great season, he might have been able to actually get this thing through, but he did okay. Grand scheme of things, should have sat tight and tried to work his way up. The purpose of the spring portal for me, and I mentioned JB Nelson, again, that's the only Penn State name we know of at the time of this recording hopping into the portal. The portal window in the spring for me was built for a situation like JB Nelson, where he's in competition for a starting guard spot. And there's a lot of guys in rotation. It's not clear that he's going to be the guy, and his eligibility is dwindling. So maybe there's younger players behind him that Penn State wants to get in there. JB's like, hey, I've been a valuable starter at the Big Ten level on a playoff team. He will go and get a job somewhere as a starter, maybe a not like an unquestioned starter at guard somewhere, and he'll get paid quite well, and maybe he'll help his draft stock. That's what this seems like it was probably intended for. But I mean, you're seeing a lot of guys right now in the spring transfer portal. Guys are hopping in that are second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth string guys, thinking that they're going to get a better chance elsewhere. And maybe you will, depending on where you fluctuate. You're seeing a handful of playmakers hop in there, like Jade Knott, the running back from Cal. He's got some pop. The wide receiver Pena from Syracuse had a great year last year with Kyle McCord, but that system was built for him. So it's like there's a handful of names out there, but like we always say it's like nobody the likes of a Travis Hunter, Jeremiah Smith, JT Tuimoloau is like, you know what I mean? It's like hopping in the portal in the spring. So for Nico to hop in the portal with all this baggage and I want X amount of money, how many programs are reasonably like, yep, you can hold us up for highway robbery?
Well, think about it. When you take on a player after spring, I mean, you're missing a whole season of reps, essentially,
especially
right? Especially at quarterback. So again, when we think about this commodification process of getting closer to the money, it aligns with the development process as guys are getting better, where they have true leverage to have sustainability. And I think that's the part where a lot of 98% of people aren't qualified to do. Whether it's an agent, they don't understand the full developmental process. They might be able to evaluate to say, hey, he might be worth this based on the market. But the actual development process of the individual athlete and the commodification process and how those two things intertwine is something that a lot of people do not speak of. Because when we think of even mental health situations and things of that nature that come out of sports, it's more of that relation between the commodification process of turning into a product and that player development when you're still trying to find yourself, develop yourself as a human being in something that you're doing. And then that's leveling up against, product and enterprise. That the dichotomy between those two and what happens to the athlete is when we have mental health issues or mental health and things of that nature. So there's there's many levels of this whole NIL space and player development, player empowerment that is happening that people aren't even aware of, but you have a lot of individuals that are coming in the game that's saying that they're helping, athletes. And I guess I'm a little less patient because I've been the athlete and I've seen all these people that stand on the sidelines and trying to profit off of athletes. And now it's like, you want to help. Like, where were you all this time? Because now it's just like a gold mine and people are just jumping in, where you see parents taking bits and pieces of headlines and thinking that they can do things. Because that's where a lot of this stuff comes from, where it's like a lot of headline readers where it's like, oh, I could do this, I could do that. And or trainers get a call from a coach and they get a sense of validation where it's like, oh, I can do this part of the representation. And it's just like, no one really understands what everybody does in the business and where value is kind of assigned and what people are looking for, what makes someone valuable and valuable, not want to do business with anybody. And all it comes down to like a misrepresentation of the asset, right? Like of like, hell, how good is this player actually? So before, when we came through, it was like, there was a process. So by the time people were starting to pay, like there was 18, 20 years of evaluation, right? So now we're talking about 16, 17, and it's just different levels. And yeah, it's kind of interesting how it's all moving. But again, I keep seeing that the biggest victims in this whole situation, regardless of the money, it tends to be the players, because we don't recognize like the life cycle. And I mean, we're seeing it. We just got to pay attention, whether it's the Mikey Williams in basketball, rest in peace, Kyron Lacey and LSU. I can connect these, but we don't probably have enough time to kind of get into it. But like, there's a conditioning that happens to athletes from about 11 to 24 years old that everyone's just kind of like obtuse to. Like, it seems like not paying attention. And I'm a little aggravated by it because we keep talking about all this other stuff. And you see, it's nuanced and it's dynamic, and players are left vulnerable listening to ignorant adults, or ignorant parents, right? And it's just nobody's there to pick up the pieces when it all comes crashing down. And that's what I think we'll see happen more often in this college space as we continue to move forward.
To tie this into Penn State, because as I mentioned before, there are NIL teams and there are developmental teams. Now, some people might hear the word developmental and think about it's like, well, that sounds like a G5 team. And it's like, no, like Penn State's clearly not a G5 team. They're a top 5 team in FBS football. Developmental, what I mean is we're going to recruit you, we're going to pay you well, a market value, and we are going to develop you into a better person, player, and potential pro while you're here. If you're here for a smash and grab job, that's not what Penn State's all about. So when you hear the alleged story that Nico and other Tennessee players were attempting to hold up their collective for more money on the brink of the playoff game against Ohio State, how does that make you react? Because if that happened at Penn State, the guy would be shown the door so fast, it feels like.
Again, it's more business practices, not what you're like where you're valued at. Like these things are clear in the NFL when you have a CBA. I'm not the biggest fan of the CBA, but when you have clear bounds of when someone can move and when they can't, right now we're just giving too many options of like, hey, we can demand money here or there. But like, yo, if a player asks for money before a playoff game, regardless of the agent saying like, hey, we made an agreement for 12 games and we're now going to play 13 or 14. It's just, again, it's just bad business principles. I'm not going to hold the standard to the NCAA because they set terrible business principles because it wasn't necessarily a business. It was a nonprofit that was operating like an amateur sport. So we understand that transition happens. But again, if that's not like followed through in a practical and efficient way for the player is the one that's left at the bottom of the rumble when it all falls down. And then they're also the ones that are blamed for it. So I have a little bit more empathy for the player, and I have a lot of smoke and anger for like the systems and the leaders that are super smart and setting up the things, and everybody cares about the player, but no one really cares about the player. You're not incentivized to, but whatever.
No, there's no incentive to really do that. And I take solace in the fact that it seems like Penn State does care about those things, and they do care about the development of the person.
Yo, that's a great point because I would say that Penn State definitely is one of those programs when you say developmental, because I think to separate them as a developmental program and NIL program even gives a false pretense of what it is, right? Like you have NIL programs that want to stack and do whatever you want to do. And you have programs that are looking to build and pay players that build with them, right? I think there's like a partnership and then there's like a leasing. There's like a mercenary program and then there's like programs that build within. And you can look to that like in the NFL where you got guys or like teams like the Steelers or the Packers or the Patriots that build through the draft. Not to say that they don't pay players that have shown their value in their team, but their philosophy is draft and build versus, some guys are like, F those picks and like, we want to trade and do whatever we need to do. It's two different philosophies. They both work in the NFL, but if we're in the development game or if we're still in college at that point of the commodification process and the development is still kind of intertwined, then you have to evaluate which programs are doing it and which ones are going to leave you susceptible and vulnerable when you might not make it to the NFL or when your services are done. So these are all the different evaluation points that guys need to go through. And it's crazy that a lot of college administrators aren't even aware of it, right? Because it's stuff that happens in professional sports and they're just making rules, not really understanding the effects that happen to the player. And they say that that's what they're there for. So again, it's all BS. Just make sure guys are valuable and that you can have some leverage against the team to be able to play and keep your roster spot moving forward.
The thing, and not to harp on Nico individually, because I'm sure there's Penn State fans who could care less about what's going on with the former Tennessee quarterback, but I think he's a great case study because of the position he plays, the hype that's been around him, his ability, his production. That's another element. So he now has a choice to make with, I believe, a handful of years of eligibility remaining is, are you going for a payday somewhere? Or are you going somewhere to be developed? Because you clearly still have to be developed and get somewhere. If your goal is, I'm going to max out my earning potential in the 4 or 5 years that I'm at the college level and kind of like whatever happens in the NFL happens in the NFL. Okay, like that's just not really the best strategy. It seems like the way that Drew Aller and Nick Singleton, as two very high profile recruits, for instance, at Penn State, came in. It's like, hey, put in the time. We'll make sure that you're developed. Look at a Tyler Warren, who when he got recruited, did anybody think he would be a top 15 pick in the National Football League? Not necessarily, but that's what Penn State is all about. We're going to take you from point A to B to C to D, and we're going to make you a better person and player over time. This isn't about, I better get X this year, or I'm just going to hop to another place because I have no NFL hopes.
Well, I mean, it's funny you say that because I mean, I think with that standpoint, you're talking about player development and the stability of environment and a player continuing to develop. And let's be honest, like there's been players that have tried to hold Penn State hostage, right? Like that has happened and they have stories behind the thing, but like they got it figured out. So like when people see other stories and they feel like they're as valuable as those guys, there has to be some level of rapport and understanding. And I think Penn State has done a good job in setting that standard in recruiting, how they've retained players, how they dealt with players coming out of the portal. And some of those things give that, have been I guess I'm saying critiqued in the sense of like not getting a top end receiver, not willing to spend and different things of that nature. But like these are the times where like I used to point back to like the stability is something that you want to more so lean on. Cause I mean, yeah, like I think they pay players well but they still believe in developing recruits or finding guys that fit within the culture of the program. And I think that's beneficial. And you see that through a lot of the sustainable good teams, right? In college sports. But yeah, the thing is finding those players that fit within your program and what you're trying to pitch, because I think you're right. Drew Aller and the running back stand for 4 years. That's one way of doing it. But those are the guys that were identified and profiled to fit within that Penn State ecosystem to have success.
Yeah.
I don't believe that that's everybody. I remember recruiting Bo Nix, right? And the first time I called his name, he was like, hey, man, thanks, coach, but we're not coming up north to play football. Boom, boom. He knew that they were going to play down there, but I'm just saying, so he had his nice career at Auburn, and then they transferred to Oregon, and he had a great career. Same thing with Jaden Daniels. I remember him coming out of high school and went to Arizona State, had his thing, went to LSU. So there's different ways of still maneuvering. But again, each asset is completely different. So I don't like blanket rules for anything. Like the game is to commoditize the player, but the player to be able to have any type of leverage has to be evaluated and looked at as an individual asset and which environment are they set up to succeed in. And there's so many different layers that come down to that when you understand the business and the other side of what expectations you're trying to hit and all those different type of things. And honestly, very few people are qualified to give advice in the college space because there's so many variables that change, but we have to understand the asset, the player to the core of, from the mental standpoint, how they develop, how they learn, how they deal with adversity, competitive nature, deal with coaches yelling, like all the different things that you're going through. It's just those things are being pushed down to the bottom, and now money's being,
pushed to the top.
Pushed to the top. And yeah,
I look at Aldavian Collins, for instance, cornerback for Penn State right now, as the poster child for how Penn State wants to work with the transfer portal. And I think he was a spring acquisition. Was it 2 years ago? I can't remember if it was spring or winter, but
a couple years ago.
Got him from Mississippi State, talented freshman, but wasn't like a big time recruit necessarily, but like had the skill set clearly that Terry Smith and this team liked. And the thought process is in a couple of years, he can be a big player for us. He can be a big time playmaker for us. And wouldn't you know it, all the talk right now in spring practice is about how good Aldavian Collins looks and is expected to be one of the 3 starting corners for Penn State this coming year. That's what you're trying to get this time of year. And I know people hear that and they're like, oh, there's no instant gratification. They're a project, that sort of thing. It's like, great. You're going to be happy in a couple of years when they're holding down the position and that guy on the assembly line ahead of him is doing their thing now, and so on and so forth. And I think it is this desire from fans, the media, us just as observers to, yeah, of course it'd be great to have that instant gratification. We had instant gratification with Julian Fleming for 1 second, and then it was out once the games actually started being played. And that's the risk you run. And that you have situations like Alonzo Ford's been a great example coming from Old Dominion. Not too many fans really expected a whole lot because it was a jump up and play. He was a contributing defensive tackle last year. Once healthy, he's expected to be a starter this coming year. That's what Penn State is trying to capitalize on in the transfer portal, as opposed to overpaying for a guy who's built a reputation on hype or star ratings, or I was at this program before, so I'm worth this, that sort of thing. And that's the real challenge. And I know you deal with this, is who actually has success in those renegotiations, being like, hey, I feel like I'm being underpaid. What are the legs that they have to stand on? How did they make that competent argument to a school that is going to be fair, but they're not going to bend over necessarily for somebody holding them up for a crazy amount of money.
Honestly, a lot of the, third-hand negotiations that I've been hearing about, whether it's from coaches, agents, or different people, it's like the player is completely delusional, like, or their representative is saying based on some arbitrary numbers that they're worth X, and it's just like talking about backup players asking for high six figures on positions that they haven't done. Like, there's just people don't really understand the value of a player and what makes them valuable, and it's being shown right now across representatives that I deal with, or whether it's coaches that overpay players based on former star ratings and job security with landing recruits. Like, there's a lot of contradictory things that these decisions are being made on that. They don't always align. Like, they don't align with wins, right? There's a lot of individual, pursuits within this thing. And as long as that, so you can break down each case by case situation, but it really comes down to, again, understanding the asset and understanding the need and wants of a team, and then kind of finding that happy balance to where the player, I guess, is getting what they're looking for from in terms of development and the right cash. And it just asks the question, like, do you want $400,000 today, or do you want a chance to maybe make 40 million? Like, depending on like where it is. And like someone will say, like, I would like to do both. And it's like, all right, well, this is how both looks like. So maybe this isn't that important, right? Like, and you have to work to get here. But a lot of it, when you think about players and the representatives and parents, it's very, 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 very emotional, especially again, at this younger age. We're not dealing with NFL players. Everyone keeps using NFL, and in NFL they do this. Those are grown men that have gone through the funnel of the development, and it's a little bit different. We're talking about parents that still see these kids as babies, and they play like the kids haven't finished algebra 2 yet. So it's like it's a completely different monster that we're creating. Like, I'm telling you, like, the business is creating the monster. So I have a lot of empathy for the player. Like, you come up on visits at 13, 14 years old, and the school is telling you, like, hey, start saving your money. And then the school is putting Lamborghinis in front of you. Like, that's a hard lesson to like condition a player or athlete to see like what's actually valuable. So like, we could talk about the byproducts and like why guys value what. It's just like, the funnel is the funnel. I was at OT7 this past weekend, the big 7-on-7 tournament. It's great. It's a great production. It's beautiful. It's on NFL Network. The guys get national exposure, but there's a lot of things within that are terrible to the game and to the player. Like, what they feel like is actually valuable in this moment of like hype, Instagram likes, brand building versus like, building a sustainable sports asset moving forward. Cause like, there's a lot of things that I think set them up or condition them for failure moving forward. But a lot of people around the production are making tons of money, and they can make the case that this is branding, this is NIL, we're giving them a platform. And I think this all, it's a balance. It's just like 60% true, 40% bullshit. You know what I mean? So
right. I look at this recent free agent cycle in the National Football League as an example. Defensive lineman Milton Williams going from the Philadelphia Eagles to the New England Patriots, got his biggest payday since being a pro. Played a smaller percentage of the snaps last year for the Philadelphia Eagles, but he was extremely productive. So you could argue he's closer to the end of his development arc than most. So he probably still has some work to do, obviously, because he can play more snaps now for New England, but he gets his quote unquote bag. All right, great. How many years has he been in the league? How old is he? How many snaps has he played? How many years has he played? That sort of thing. For Nico, for somebody to be doing this between the ages of 18 and 22, you're not even close. So putting yourself in that argument of Nico potentially comparing himself to Carson Beck, allegedly getting somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 million to go play for the Miami Hurricanes. Also, it's allegedly. This stuff is not out in the open. How many of these circumstances are hearsay and McDonald's bag situations? We just don't know. So if you to walk in and be like, so-and-so is getting this, it's like, great. Carson Beck had not the best year last year as compared to 2023, but he had a better year than Nico Iamaleava. So if Nico went there and it's like, I deserve Carson money, you're already wrong, period. So there's misguidance from families. There's misguidance from representation agents who don't care about your overall arc. They just care about the percentage and their direct deposit in this whole thing. again, just to tie this back to Penn State, because I think there will come a day where every program feels this. And whether it's happened behind closed doors already for Penn State, or there's going to come a day like this where dirty laundry is out in the open, it's the changing landscape of college football. It's why we need this House settlement to get figured out. It's why a CBA is probably a good idea. It's why contracts are extremely necessary at this point in time. And this is decades upon decades of these schools and conferences not wanting to pay players, but wanting to line their pockets with the money from TV deals, etc. This is what you get. You reap what you sow. And this was inevitable for players to want to get paid their value. You're tuning in on a Saturday to see Nick Singleton, to see Drew Aller, Denai Dennis Sutton. The list goes on and on of these stars, and then these critical players that you care about. So I don't know, man. I feel bad for Nico, the individual, but you have to take responsibility of this when you're dealing with these things at this level. And again, I hope there's realistic expectations for what Penn State is looking for and could actually get in the spring transfer portal window. And also, oh, by the way, and you probably know more about this than I, in terms of the number of players Penn State has versus the number they're allowed to have. Not everybody can be on the team. Guys got to go.
Amateurism is dead. We need to start acting like it. And I mean, it does start with having some foundational rules outside, and guys need to understand that, like, where their value is. And I think that's what's lacking. We try to do that at LIG Sports Group level, to playing field, so guys can at least go through the business with some truth, because there's a lot of smoke signals that give the wrong impression of how valuable you are to keep you in a position of, I guess, disarray.
Mm-hmm. Stay tuned here on State of State as the spring transfer portal window continues. As I mentioned, we're recording this on Tuesday. At the time of this recording, we're only aware of JB Nelson having entered into the portal, so we'll continue to cover Penn State's movements in and out of the transfer portal as we get closer and closer to the blue-white game on Saturday, April 26th. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.